All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. Lots to get into from over the weekend. Major developments pretty much every hour of the day in regards to this ceasefire that's hanging on by a thread at this point between Israel and Hamas. We had a major provocation from the Israelis over the weekend. We've had major killings of Palestinians from Hamas over the weekend, and we're going to get into all of that here today. Also, we're going to touch on the 60 Minutes interview involving Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Some very interesting things came out of that, and there were some very telling statements from both Witkoff and Kushner. We'll get into that. JD Vance is in Israel today, and we'll talk about why he's there and what the goal of that trip is. And also, we will talk about Donald Trump's latest attack on the two best members of both the House and the Senate, Rand Paul and Thomas Massie of Kentucky. So all this today and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve System.
Only America first.
End all of these wars. America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. We're almost at 100 subscribers, just a couple away. So if everyone watching right now would go down below and hit subscribe, I'm sure we could get there, and I'd really appreciate it if you did. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and following all those pages over there, I post content there all the time that I'm sure you'd enjoy. So if you wouldn't mind going over and giving that a follow, I'd really appreciate it. But let's get right into the news of the weekend. The major story, the major development involving the ceasefire was that over the weekend, a couple of IDF soldiers were killed while they were in Gaza. They were apparently, from all the reports, they were part of a crew operating a bulldozer, and a bunch of IDF soldiers were killed in what we now believe to be an explosion caused by the bulldozer running over an unexploded bomb from Israel from previously in the war that they didn't know was there. But at the time, right after this happened, Netanyahu instantly used this event and said that it was Hamas that had jumped out and ambushed these soldiers from tunnels that they didn't know were there. And as a result of this, within minutes, the IDF in Israel launched airstrikes in Gaza and were, of course, as they always do with these airstrikes, killing innocent civilians. But they said they were going after terror tunnels that they didn't know were there and that the Hamas militants had been hiding out in and waiting to ambush the IDF from. So that was happening. But right as this began to go down, right as the IDF launched their air attacks, the Trump administration and the White House were said to have not believed it for a second that it was Hamas that did this. And in fact, there were very major reports from two DC insiders. Ryan Grimm of Breaking Points and Dropsite said, right after this happened, he said, "Soon after the explosion in Rafah, I'm told by a source familiar, the White House and Pentagon knew that the incident was caused by an Israeli settler bulldozer running over unexploded ordnance, contradicting Netanyahu's claim that Hamas had popped up from the tunnels. After Netanyahu said he was blocking all aid from entering Gaza in response and unleashed a bombing campaign, the administration conveyed to Israel that they know what happened. Netanyahu then announced he would reopen the crossings in a few hours." So he also goes into detail there about not only did Netanyahu begin to bomb what they were saying were terror tunnels in Gaza, but also they were inflicting what can only be described as the most clear-cut form of collective punishment in cutting off aid that was set to enter Gaza to, feed like starving children and starving women in Gaza. So not only do we resume the bombing during which innocent people are killed regularly, but we're also going to deny these starving people that have basically been blockaded on and off for the last 2 years the food they desperately need. So that is what Netanyahu was doing. And of course, he says the White House knew instantly that it was not a Hamas attack. They knew instantly that the IDF was lying about this, and that Netanyahu was being opportunistic and using this to resume the fighting. We also had reports from Kurt Mills, who is an administration insider. He's regularly appeared on Steve Bannon, and he knows pretty much everyone in the administration. He's a very inside DC person. He said in a tweet right after this as well, quote, "Senior administration official tells me, quote, Hamas did nothing. Israeli tank hit an unexploded IED that has probably been there for months, end quote. So we have all the insiders saying that the White House knew instantly that Netanyahu was using this as a pretense to resume the fighting. And you see, what I don't understand is how we don't treat him like we treated Zelensky just a couple months back, and how we don't have these major public blowups. I mean, Trump, the amount of work that Donald Trump and this administration put in to get this deal done, only to have Netanyahu repeatedly number one, he's not even following the ceasefire because Palestinians are being killed daily. 80 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire started, and over 300 injured. But not only is he just blatantly ignoring the ceasefire, but he's also going out of his way to try and mess it up and try and resume the fighting. But for some reason, we continue to put up with it, even though all of our administration's efforts over the past couple months basically has been to try and get a ceasefire in place, only to have Netanyahu try and disrupt that. So that was what happened over the weekend. It was a major escalation, and it seemed for a minute that the ceasefire was done. But luckily, and this is what we'll get into in a second with JD Vance going over there, it seems that the administration was able to calm both sides down and resume the ceasefire. And it seems, as of right now, that the ceasefire technically is in place. This hasn't stopped the Israelis from conducting different campaigns, and they've, of course, killed innocent Palestinians since. But as of right now, it is technically still in place. And this brings me to the JD Vance visit to Israel, which he is currently on. He left for Israel yesterday, and this is an article from the New York Times that talks about how anonymous sources from the administration are coming to the New York Times and reporting that they are very concerned about Israel holding up their end of the deal. This is an article titled, "White House Works to Preserve Gaza Deal Amid Concerns About Netanyahu," and it is by Katie Rogers and Luke Broadwater from yesterday. And it says, quote, "The White House worked to hold together the Gaza peace deal on Monday as American officials said they were increasingly concerned that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, could dismantle the U.S. brokered agreement. Vice President J.D. Vance was headed to Israel, where he was joined by Steve Witkoff, Mr. Trump's Middle East peace envoy, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who were instrumental in brokering the deal. At the same time, President Trump warned that he would allow Israeli forces to, quote, eradicate Hamas if violence in the enclave continued. Several Trump officials, speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss private conversations, said there is concern within the administration that Mr. Netanyahu may vacate the deal. The strategy now, the officials say, is for Mr. Vance, Mr. Witkoff, and Mr. Kushner to try to keep Mr. Netanyahu from resuming an all-out assault against Hamas. Hopefully, the ceasefire does stay intact, and the Israelis and Hamas can stop provoking each other. We have Hamas now here we have JD Vance going to Israel, and New York Times is reporting that there are administration officials reporting that they are very concerned with Netanyahu's willingness to continue this deal. And this matches up with the reporting of many other insiders who have reported the same thing. If you go look on Twitter, people like Kurt Mills, for example, these insiders that report on this, say the same thing, that the administration is very concerned with the Israelis holding up their end of the deal because they know the Israelis actually don't really want peace and they want to continue their goal, which they have committed to for the past 2 years, in their own words, of continuing the fighting. And we'll see how this goes in terms of the ceasefire. For now, again, it is technically being held up, and we'll see where this leads. And now we have Hamas, of course, with no regard to the PR of this, in Gaza right now, committing public executions and just mass atrocities against civilians that they accuse of collaborating with Israel. And of course, there's no public trials in Gaza, obviously, so there's no due process whatsoever, and they're just killing people based off accusations. And this is where we get to both sides, really, are dealing with different issues. Israel and Netanyahu are dealing with the fact that a large portion of the Israeli government does not want to stop the fighting, and they want the fighting to continue. We have members like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and probably Netanyahu himself, who don't want to stop the fighting. They feel it is beneficial to keep the fighting going. I mean, you have Smotrich and Ben-Gvir out there every day, basically instigating violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Look this up. There's regular attacks on Palestinian villages by Israeli settlers in the West Bank because these Israeli settlers are all riled up by the ultra-nationalists that are Smotrich and Ben-Gvir that believe this is all Israeli land. So you have that faction, which is very vocal and very influential in the Israeli government right now, that is pushing Netanyahu very hard to continue the fighting in Gaza, move to annex the West Bank, make all these moves right now before the elections next year. So we'll see where this leads. And then, of course, you have Hamas, which we have confusion now over whether Hamas is going to give up their arms. Apparently, the reports were that Trump is under the impression that Hamas agreed to give up their arms, and reports from Hamas officials say that Hamas agreed to that only if this deal included a Palestinian state of some kind. So it seems somewhere along the line there was a communication gap, and this is the problem here, because the issue with the ceasefire deal is, number one, that it's a ceasefire deal and not a peace deal, and people keep getting that confused. The reason that it's not a peace deal is because none of the underlying issues, none of the fundamentals that caused October 7th, that caused this war, are fixed at all. We don't have a Palestinian state that's going to in this deal at all. We don't have any agreement on whether Hamas will disarm or not. There's no plan on who will be in charge of Gaza besides these like technocrats. Like we have Tony Blair and maybe, who knows, maybe Kushner's friends. I don't know. There's no real plan here for the next day, and that's the issue. And that's why, I hope that this ceasefire holds, but that's why since the beginning I've been a little bit cautious in my optimism, because none of the fundamentals have been solved. So that we'll leave off there on the ceasefire. I do want to get to this 60 Minutes interview that was with Witkoff and Kushner, and it was a very telling interview. They were discussing the ceasefire deal, and they were discussing also the attacks on Qatar that the Israelis pulled off a couple months back. So here's the first clip that I found very interesting. They reveal a lot of information in this interview, and that is really what separates this administration from previous administrations, because these guys aren't like media trained as much as these professional career politicians that know what to say and what not to say, what information to drop and what to not drop. And these guys are a lot more casual and a lot more laid back than previous officials in, say, the Biden administration, for example. So you get a lot more information out of them just by accident. So here we have Witkoff and Kushner talking about the attack on Qatar and how they both felt betrayed. Here, take a look at this.
We woke up the next morning to find out that there had been this attack. Wow. And of course, I was called by the president.
You had no idea, obviously.
None whatsoever. I think both Jared and I felt, I just feel we felt a little bit betrayed.
Now, I had heard that the president, that he was furious.
I think he felt like the Israelis were getting a little bit out of control in what they were doing, and that it was time to be very strong and stop them from doing things that he felt were not in their long-term interests.
People should understand that Netanyahu, the Israelis, bombed the peacemakers, bombed the negotiating team.
And by the way, Leslie, it had a metastasizing effect because the Qataris were critical to the negotiation, as were the Egyptians and the Turks. And we had lost the confidence of the Qataris.
Right.
And so Hamas went underground, and it was very, very difficult to get to them. And
they were your link to Hamas.
Absolutely.
You were dealing through the Qataris to make your proposals to Hamas.
And it became very, very evident as to how important and how critical that role was.
So there we have Witkoff saying that they felt betrayed after the Israeli attack on Qatar, and we have Jared Kushner discussing how the Israelis went a little bit too far, just a little bit. Welcome to the party, Jared Kushner. It's been a couple years at this point that the Israelis have gone too far, but we got there, so that's all that counts. Okay, so Witkoff's answer there about how they felt betrayed by Qatar is very interesting, and it may be the most telling administration admission, basically, since that attack on Qatar. We had these very diplomatic answers throughout the entire thing, and of course we had Donald Trump, of course, make Netanyahu apologize to the Emir of Qatar at the White House a couple weeks back for that attack. And it's important to just reiterate again, we've talked about it before on the show, the significance of that attack and how telling it was to the Israelis' motives in this war. All available reporting, it's basically confirmed at this point, and Witkoff says it in this interview, that the Israelis were attacking the negotiating team of Hamas. Not Hamas militants, but their negotiating team. Now, why do you go after the negotiating team if you're not trying to, disrupt the negotiations? To knock over the negotiations. That's the only reason you would go after the negotiating team. So this tells us a lot about the motives here of Israel. They don't want to negotiate. People in their government say this, but we choose in the Western media to ignore them, even though they've said it in their own words. But here we have a very clear, tangible example of them not wanting to negotiate by literally killing the negotiating team. So there was Witkoff's answer. We also had Jared Kushner here saying that Israel went a tiny bit too far, that the president thinks Israel may have gone a tiny bit too far. No, yeah, okay. Very diplomatic of you, Jared Kushner, but it's been a long time coming for anyone to say that Israel's been a little bit too far. Yes, they've gone very much too far, and the fact it is interesting though. The fact that the Trump administration officials are willing to say that at this point is farther than any Biden administration officials would have gone. It's farther than the Trump administration's gone to this point. So it's very interesting to look at to get kind of an inside glimpse at what the administration as a whole is thinking about this. So that was a very interesting clip to see Jared Kushner kind of candidly saying that Israel did go a little bit too far in this war. Next clip I do want to play here is, like, it's a bit ridiculous. We have Jared Kushner describing what Gaza looked like and then emphatically saying, no, there's no possible way it's a genocide. Take a look.
You decide to go to Gaza. And what did you see?
It looked almost like a nuclear bomb had been set off in that area. And then you see these people moving back, and I asked the IDF, where are they going? Like, I'm looking around, these are all ruins. And they said, well, they're going back to the areas where their destroyed home was, onto their plot, and they're going to pitch a tent. And it's very sad, because you think to yourself, they really have nowhere else to go.
Would you say now, having been there, that it was genocide?
No. No.
Absolutely not. No. No, there was a war being fought.
Gotta love this answer from Jared Kushner. Gives this entire story, this upsetting, disturbing story about the realities on the ground in Gaza. And he's talking about how it looks like a nuclear bomb went off, entire neighborhoods are flattened. We have the people whose homes have been destroyed going back to their homes and setting up camps and tents on top of the rubble that was their home. It's this incredibly upsetting scene that he's setting here. Was it a genocide? No. No. It's like... And then we have Witkoff's answer right after that, which is no better. He's like, no, of course not. It's a war. Okay, well, how about we talk about the actual realities on the ground instead of trying to put labels on it to make it justified? Because we all know in the mainstream media and in our government that anything labeled as war is justified. Because we would never label a genocide because that is unjustified. But if we label it war, then therefore we can justify it. Well, how about we actually just be real here and just talk about be real human beings with some mind and a mind of our own and think for a second instead of just parroting words that we think align with being justified or not justified. Let's actually talk about the inhumanity of this for a second, because Jared Kushner is describing this like it was as if a nuclear bomb went off. Okay, Jared Kushner, do you think that it is justified in this situation to have dropped a nuclear bomb and done that much damage to a population? Do you think that was at all justified? To have destroyed these people's homes to where they have no home and they're living in a tent on top of the rubble that was their home after this family... Put yourself in the position, Jared Kushner, of a family in Gaza that maybe lost a son and a daughter, that's living on the rubble of what was their home, is starving, looking for food. Do you think that was justified? Oh, and by the way, their neighborhood looks like a nuclear bomb went off. Do you think that was justified? Do you think that was a justified response? Do you think if we put the word war next to it, then it becomes justified and we don't have to face the reality of the inhumanity of this? Or do you think maybe Israel went a tiny bit too far? Can we get real for a second? I understand these guys are part of the administration and they can't really talk about things from their own mind because they can't cross different borders. They can't cross different barriers that the administration sets about the administration's position on these matters. I understand that. But let's get real for a second. That was Witkoff saying, no, it was a war. It's the dumbest response of all time. Okay, the question wasn't, was it a war? Because that means nothing. We can call anything a war. It's just semantic games. How about we actually talk about the inhumanity of it and get real for a second? But we wouldn't get that real on mainstream media, would we? Last clip I want to show here is probably the most telling, and it was when Witkoff just candidly admits that the CIA was feeding him false intelligence on whether Hamas was going to be a yes or a no on the deal. Take a look.
Well, first, one thing I'm going to point out is that we were getting, because of our relationships, and this goes back to that conflict of interest question you had for us, but our relationships were direct with the leaders of these three countries, and we were hearing that Hamas was positive on the deal. And yet I was reading intelligence reports every day and getting briefings from the CIA 3 times a day, and those intelligence briefings were suggesting that Hamas was going to say no. And so Jared and I had to make a decision as to where we thought this was going. And both of us, we didn't need to convince one another. We really felt that this was going in a positive way. And sure enough, Hamas came out and said, we accept the president's plan. And that allowed us to get into the next gear.
Okay, so if any of this is true, then John Ratcliffe needs to be fired immediately. Like, the CIA is feeding false intelligence reports to the Middle East peace envoy about whether Hamas is going to say yes or no. And it's funny that when it seems every time our intelligence is wrong, it's quite the coincidence that it's always wrong in the direction that would push us towards continuing a war. It was wrong in 2001, in 2002, in 2003 in regards to WMDs in Iraq, and it was wrong in the direction that it pushed the Bush administration into a war in Iraq. And now it's wrong here again by pushing us in the direction of allowing Israel to continue the war in Gaza by saying that Hamas was going to be a no on the deal, even though the Arab leaders who are in communication with Hamas say they are positive on the deal. So if any of this is true, then how can we not come to the conclusion that John Ratcliffe needs to be fired or somebody needs to be held accountable? Someone needs to find out what happened here, because the intelligence reports going to the negotiating team in the United States are completely false. So maybe, wild idea, if they're always false, and always false in a way that's tragic, potentially, and getting us involved in a continuing of a war, maybe they don't deserve our tax funds. And by they, I mean the CIA and the entire intelligence apparatus. Maybe if they're always wrong, and we're openly admitting, government officials openly admitting they were wrong, and very consequentially wrong, maybe they don't deserve the massive amount of funding, which, by the way, we don't know the grand total for. We're not allowed to know how much the CIA makes, or how much they bring in funding every year. We're not allowed to know that, by the way. You don't know how much of your money is going towards the CIA, which is getting intelligence reports wrong about Middle East wars. So that's the ridiculousness of all this, is that the CIA, which gets a massive amount of funding that we don't even know how much they get, is getting intelligence wrong, according to Steve Witkoff. So that's where we'll leave it off for that 60 Minutes interview. Very telling. A lot of good information that came out of that. And lastly, I do want to touch on one more issue today, which I just personally find very important. We have Donald Trump over the weekend attacking the two best members of both the House and the Senate, respectively. We have Thomas Massie getting attacked by Donald Trump and Rand Paul getting attacked by Donald Trump. The best member of the House and the best member of the Senate getting attacked by Donald Trump, and basically he endorses Thomas Massie's primary opponent. He says, quote, in a Truth Social post, he says, quote, "Third-rate Congressman Thomas Massie, a weak and pathetic rhino from the great Commonwealth of Kentucky, a place I love and won big 6 times, must be thrown out of office ASAP. The incredible people of Kentucky's 4th Congressional District gave us a mandate to make America great again, and the person that will help us do that is Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, and 5th-generation Kentucky farmer, Captain Ed Gallarain, a true America First patriot." And then he goes on to discuss all of Gallarain's supposed credentials. And by the way, about Gallarain, he is a Lindsey Graham fundraiser, by the way. He goes on to say, "I hope Ed gets into the race against Massie, who is now polling at about 9%, just totally false, because the great people of Kentucky are wise to him. He only votes against the Republican Party, making life very easy for the radical left. Unlike lightweight Massie, a totally ineffective loser who has failed us so badly, Captain Ed Gallarain is a winner who will not let you down." Just absolute trash statement. Just like the worst statement, the dumbest low IQ statement he's ever put out on Truth Social. I mean, like, this never votes for the Republican Party. What is this, a tribal game? Like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Never votes for the Republican Party. The Republican Party never votes for anything that they say they believe in. Thomas Massie is someone who has actual principles, by the way. The Republican Party that claims to be the small government, fiscally conservative, and non-interventionist party, they vote to increase the deficit, increase the debt to by $6 trillion in this latest big beautiful bill. They're running like a $3 trillion deficit. We have them expanding government and taking control of industry like Intel. And we have wars in Israel and Ukraine and potentially now in Venezuela that the taxpayers' money is being just extracted from the population and being spread across the world. So actually, Thomas Massie is the most conservative member of Congress. He's really the only conservative member of Congress because he actually votes conservative. And yeah, he's not a rhino. There was a campaign ad put against him that says he always sides with the radical left. Like, who is this supposed to appeal to? The dumbest person who knows nothing about politics in the middle of where? Kentucky? Like, what did we talk? This is the dumbest thing ever. He doesn't, if you talk to, the only thing he sides with the radical left on is that we don't want to send money overseas to fund Israel's war in Gaza. That's what he agrees with the radical left on. Him and the radical left just disagree on 95% of things. They want to grow the government, for example, and he wants to shrink the government. If the radical left are talking about like Bernie Sanders and AOC, they wouldn't be mad about the government taking control of certain industries. Thomas Massie is. They're very different, actually. If you look into it for 10 seconds, look it up on Wikipedia or something. He also attacked Rand Paul with the same low IQ arguments, saying that he never votes for the Republicans. He's a nasty little guy from Kentucky. And Rand Paul is the only member of Congress with any spine, only member of Congress with any principles whatsoever. He openly is non-interventionist. So yeah, he's not going to vote to, go to war with Venezuela. He's not going to vote to just shoot boats out of the water in the middle of the ocean without any due process whatsoever, without any evidence that these people are actually drug traffickers. Maybe they are, but you haven't proved it whatsoever. So he's not actually, he has principles. He is a libertarian-leaning conservative, and he has principles, unlike the rest of these shills in Congress that for some reason we support, like Lindsey Graham, who, by the way, Lindsey Graham is Donald Trump's first campaign stop for the midterms. Donald Trump's going to go out to South Carolina and campaign for Lindsey Graham while primarying Thomas Massie and fighting with Rand Paul. That's where we are. And that's why when people say, I'm on here fuming pretty much every day about the stupid stuff this administration does. And people ask, why aren't you more excited? Why aren't you, we're winning. If we're winning and Lindsey Graham is on the winning team, I don't want to be on that team. Lindsey Graham is the worst of DC. He is he's the worst. He's just terrible. We knew this 10 years ago, and for some reason we seem to have forgotten it. And we're picking fights with Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, the most these gentlemen from Kentucky that actually have principles and believe what they're saying. And it's so ridiculous, and that's why I get so mad about it. Because these guys are the actual truth tellers. These guys are the ones that believe what they're saying and are fighting for liberty in this country. And I'm gonna be on their team for this one. Okay? Sorry if that offends anybody. It's too bad, because I'm on the team of the truth tellers, and that's just who I support. So that's where I think I'll end it off for today. Thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Also, go to my Instagram, X, and Spotify and follow all those pages over there. I'd really appreciate that as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.